Thank you. Or, well, does AIG have a case? Or even a clue? All right, because the judge is in the House. I'm talking about Fox News senior judicial analyst, the way too thin now, Andrew Napolitano. Judge, a case?
Thank you, Professor Cavuto. I think they have a strong case. I think Maurice Greenberg is right on both counts. First, the bailout was definitely unconstitutional. The government can't pick and choose winners and losers. And secondly, if you're going to bail people out, you have to treat them in a similar way. Here's his argument. 3 people came to the government and bailed us out. Goldman Sachs said, we want $13 billion. The government said, don't worry about it. We'll give some money to AIG and they'll pay you the $13 billion they owe you, and it looks like it won't come from us. Morgan Stanley went to the government and said, we need some money. And the government said, we'll lend it to you at market rates. AIG went to the government and said, we're dying on the vine. We want to own 80% of you. And when the money comes back, we want 14.5% interest. By the way, we're not charging anybody more than prevailing rates on the interest, but we're going to charge you 3 times what we're paying them. So that constitutes a loss of assets for AIG, which the Fifth Amendment prohibits, and it constitutes disparate treatment. It violates the principle of equal protection, which the Fifth Amendment requires. I think Mr. Greenberg has a very good and a very strong argument to make.
One of the arguments I raised with him when I had him on Fox Business, which, Judge, if you don't get, you should demand, but is that you wouldn't be in a position you are now to sue, to sort of paraphrase a little bit about what Scott was saying. If not for even this clumsy government bailout.
Scott's argument is a good one, and if made by lawyers, it would be called waiver, meaning by accepting the government's offer, by knowing in advance you're going to pay 14%. Correct. It's too late for you to complain now. If you think this offer is too burdensome and violates your rights, you should have thought of it before. That's the argument that government lawyers will make against AIG. Mr. Greenberg's argument is different. He was ousted. He was no longer the chair of AIG at the time. He's saying he's suing just as an ordinary shareholder. He was the biggest non-governmental shareholder of AIG, and he's saying to AIG, the deal you cut with the government cost me hundreds of millions. So you,
well, the government can always say, who cares?
Owe me this money.
The government always say, who cares?
The government, his argument is to the government, you took my profits. You treated me differently than you treated Hank Paulson and others who owned Goldman Sachs stock.
But doesn't this get back to the lunacy of this whole bailout process?
Yes.
That was started on the prior president, by the way.
And in fact,
we went from, too big to fail to too many to not help. And this is the kind of stuff that happens.
In fairness to Greenberg, he says the bailout should never have happened in the first place. He's right. And if his advice had been followed, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because AIG would have gone through bankruptcy and the good parts would have survived and the bad parts would have been sold off. Now we have a mess that's going to end up costing the taxpayers more money than the bailout costed. That's because George Bush said, in order to save the free market, I have to destroy the free market.
Well, and that's what we did during George Bush's tenure. And I remember I got a lot of grief on this show, and you and I talked about it at that time. At the time, I raised it with the late, great Jack Kemp about the lunacy of starting this whole TARP stuff and these big bank bailouts. This is from back then in 2008.
The government needs to step in with Treasury to make sure there's a floor under falling real estate values, particularly residential and housing values.
Why does the government need to do that? Why not let the markets, however hellish it might be, and however hellish it might be tomorrow, Jack, if the House rejects this, let her rip. Why didn't we let her rip?
Because the government decided it could be a sugar daddy. It's interesting, and he was a wonderful and brilliant human being, though we both disagree with him on this. He's talking about the housing market. TARP was originally to preserve housing. The government was going to buy up houses about to be foreclosed.
It went into the auto industry. Mortgages. It went into cash for clunkers.
It went everywhere.
Into educational relief.
Houses.
Exactly.
Right. And now we're paying for it.
And
Maurice Greenberg has got a good case in his hands, and I wish him Godspeed.
All right. And I wish you would eat something. Judge, he is so...
Not Twinkies. They're not around anymore.
No, they're not. But they might be rescued. But I'm going to...